Good morning and welcome to chapter 12 of this seminar on the First World War, and we're looking at commemoration. This is the third chapter which looks at commemoration, and I finished last time with the question of family pride, genealogy, the interest for family history, one. And local pride and local curiosity as number two. And number three in the main streams of commemoration meanings are activist discourses. Although I've already mentioned them to some extent, of course, when the education minister and opposition parties launch in there, these are in some way activist discourses. But here I'm thinking perhaps more on particular events and their activist mentions. Now, it seems to have been quite impossible to make the centenary apolitical, which is not really very surprising. And as we saw, the very beginning of 2014 saw the Conservative Secretary of State for Education weighing in with a much commented article in the Daily Mail. Some historians were working in there as well, and a Conservative historian complained, and this is what he said: "We are witnessing a depressingly familiar spectacle. Political correctness has taken hold. Those planning the commemoration feel almost embarrassed that we won the war, and they are determined to say nothing and do nothing that might upset Germany, our modern European Union partner. I can think of no greater betrayal than for the British government to pretend that they perished for nothing, because ignorant or frightened ministers flinch from upsetting today's Germans." So you can see very hyperbolic activist discourse there, where he cannot imagine a worse betrayal than the government being careful about the commemoration. However, it has to be said that since the common sense commemorations were presented as apolitical, and many people thought that celebrating the soldiers and what was in some way apolitical, that considering them heroes was in some way apolitical. Because of this, the most visible activist discourses are on the other side, on the dissenting side, on the side of those who think that the British foreign policy of the time is nothing particular to be proud of. Indeed, the setting up of the No Glory in War campaign that you can see there ensured significant coverage for dissenting activist voices, and they managed to get the support of a certain number of celebrities, whether actors or politicians, and so on and so forth. And they went much further than opposition to commemorations usually goes. So this campaign, No Glory, was established specifically to intervene around the Great War Centenary and to popularize a non-militaristic, non-triumphalist view of the war. The No Glory campaign chose its name carefully, I mentioned this, so as to be able to federate a fairly wide body of opinion without opposing directly the commemoration of the war, nor introducing a specifically anti-imperialist analysis. A series of celebrities such as poet laureates, the official national poet Carol Ann Duffy, rock singer Billy Bragg, Cinema director Ken Loach, and actor Jude Law were among those who signed the initial No Glory statement. And the No Glory campaign was able to respond throughout 2014 to different aspects of the debate about the war. And so when Conservative historian Dan Snow wrote his article, 10 Myths About World War I, we saw that No Glory was able to counter with 10 Myths About World War I answered. The No Glory campaign organized several dozen meetings across the country with titles such as "How Should We Remember World War I?" and "Was World War I Really a War for Democracy?" and "Carving Up the Globe, the Real Causes of World War I." It was sufficiently legitimate to be invited to a contradictory debate at the British Library, and I will try to remember to put a link online to that. They were also able to co-organize with the Manchester Centre for Regional History an alternative World War I day school in November. So a popular campaign, but perhaps very much based on quite sophisticated discourses. Now, at the other extreme of the scale from thought out intellectual commemoration and debate to popular festival, perhaps, was the production of special local beers to commemorate the centenary. These three specialty beers brewed at Irwell in Lancashire were somewhat flippantly named Over the Top, Lions Led by Donkeys, and Lest We Forget. So Lest We Forget, fairly neutral, yet the importance of remembering. Over the Top is the expression for leaving the trenches to attack and very frequently getting killed because advancing was extremely dangerous. And the third beer is named Lions Led by Donkeys, which comes from a 1930s book about the First World War, which suggested that our soldiers were lions, but the generals were donkeys. Sort of a populist anti-militarist point of view, but the fact that this could arrive in a local small business perhaps is significant. Now, one of the more interesting commemorations is around a musical play, actually written in the 60s. Now, the musical play, Oh, What a Lovely War, it is, of course, a sarcastic title, although the title comes from a pop song from the time, from 1917 or 1918, Oh, What a Lovely War, which also I will find for you. This play, musical play, was first produced in 1963 by Joan Littlewood's Theatre Workshop. And this played an important part in the cultural commemoration of the Great War in 2014. Now, this work uses maudlin or patriotic musical songs and cynical, bitter or demoralized soldiers' songs, all genuine songs from the First World War. And it uses these songs to structure a sarcastic critique of the First World War, presented as a crime perpetrated by Europe's elites against the people. It certainly is. What's the word in English? It's a must see. It's an important cultural document. It has been much denounced over the years by defenders of British policy in the Great War period. Now, in 2014, a series of revivals of the 1960s musical play were put together, and some of them were more on the acerbic political critique side of this play, and others were more on the nostalgic side of this play. So to give you a couple of examples, the Theatre Royal in Stratford, in its production, proclaimed loud and clear the anti-establishment politics of Joan Littlewood in her original 1960s staging. Indeed, in the new version in Stratford, a Pierrot clown describes a series of pre-war bank holiday scenes, while a slideshow projects images of the seaside of bathers and of a donkey. But in this 2014 production, the donkey has the head of Education Secretary Michael Gove, who has been seen, as we know, defending the First World War as a just war. So this is a sarcastic agitprop. However, uses of this musical play are not as unambiguous as one might think. So one might think of it, and certainly conservative historians tend to, as a radical left play, which will play to radical left audiences. Because certainly Joan Littlewood was a very, very left-wing person. When she produced her play in France, she included in it the Chanson de Clown, the famous anti-war song from France during the First World War, which at the time was not permitted to be shown in public. And when she went to New York, she added a little bit to the play to talk about the American millionaires who had made a lot of money from the war. And so she was always wanting to challenge the establishment. However, today, the idea that the First World War was a terrible waste of life and more useful to the elites than to anybody else has a very wide acceptance, much to the chagrin of military and conservative historians. And so I spoke to the director of a local amateur production of Oh, What a Lovely War, and he said that the audience and the actors and the singers did not at all think of themselves as left-wing in any way at all. And this is what he said: "I think people read into this play what they are comfortable with. Our production in the northeast of England is by a very cosy church hall society in a wealthy dormitory suburb. It would be hard to imagine a less radical group. We have been asked along to sing some of the songs at the town's Armistice Day ceremony and at an exhibition they are staging about the First World War. I doubt if they are really aware that this was a massively controversial piece of left-wing theatre since time lends respectability. I think it's a measure of the show's influence that it no longer seems controversial to see the Tommies as lions led by donkeys." So here you have an example of a local production, this one in Pontyland, and as you can see, it costs £8 to get in, so it's really not expensive. It's a local thing in the Memorial Hall. It's not in a big theatre or anything. It's in a hall, a town hall, salle des fêtes or something like that. Now, here is a short extract from an online version in which you can see that there's a certain amount of farce, a certain amount of circus in the intent. Now, although in the Northeast, my contact emphasized that it was not so controversial, it may not have been so controversial everywhere. In Derby, the following was reported. This again was an amateur show, as you can tell by the price of the tickets. And it said, tickets are priced at £6, with £1 from each ticket being donated between the British Legion and Help for Heroes. So this is a fascinating situation where it's £6 and they probably got a couple of hundred people all together. So it's a very small amount of money. And yet instead of giving this £100 or £200, maybe 300 maximum, instead of giving this to one charity, they're dividing it between two charities. One of them is the British Legion. It's the Poppy Appeal, who, as you know, are very respectable. And the other is Help for Heroes. And as you can tell by the name, Help for Heroes is decidedly not an anti-war association. For them, the general word for our soldiers who fight in Iraq and Afghanistan is they're all heroes. And so I would think it's fairly clear to see that what had happened when they were planning what to do with the money is there was a disagreement, and they made a compromise by giving half to Help for Heroes and half to the Royal British Legion. Now, other activist approaches, apart from the Oh, What a Lovely War, have ensured that a series of other anti-militarist commemorations were held. In London, there was a reenactment of the anti-war meeting held outside the Salisbury pub 100 years ago when the First World War broke out. So just before or just after the outbreak of the First World War, there was an anti-war meeting. And so here in the commemoration, the activists are saying, well, let's do it again. And obviously, the objective is to say that when we are commemorating the First World War, we don't want to just commemorate victory and military values and so on. We also want to commemorate the very large numbers of people in 1913 and before the war broke out, the very large numbers of people who were against the war. And the flyer for this 2014 event says, "Come and hear from some of the characters who spoke out then. There are men who went on to be conscientious objectors. There were some suffragettes who opposed the war." Remember, the majority supported. There were working people who had no quarrel with workers from other countries. There will be short speeches from characters dressed as in 1914 with songs of the period sung by Patricia Hammond, mezzo-soprano, and accompanied by Matt Redmond on the guitar, the mandolin, and the banjo. So you can see there was an attempt by activist groups. I don't know if they managed to get any public money. They might have done. It's not impossible, especially in local government. But the main dynamic was activists, people who have a political interest in getting out a series of ideas. And the last set of commemorative events that I want to look at is perhaps in some ways the most complex. And this is the various activities organized around the centenary of the famous Christmas Truce at Christmas 2014. In fact, this event was a series of 20 or more truces, generally initiated by German troops and involving a very large number of soldiers. These were acts of insubordination, and although the widespread nature of the truce meant that few were punished in 1914, those who tried to repeat the experience the following year were sometimes court-martialed and imprisoned. Celebrating such a rebellion might be thought to be the reserve of anti-war activists or even anti-army activists. In the event, the commemoration was taken up widely by establishment figures and institutions with little comment on the contradictions involved. Events commemorating the truce included simultaneous street art events in London and Berlin, organized, and I quote, in the spirit of promoting ongoing peace. There was also a Christmas Truce centenary party on the 20th of December. This party, said the information, will be opened by football writer and spoken word artist Musa Okwanga, presenting a specially written poem to honor one of the first Black British footballers killed on active service in 1918. Now, the inclusion of football in the commemoration is due to the widely reported and unsurprising fact that one of the joint activities of British and German soldiers during the truce was playing football. Now, a memorial to the truce, a statue, if you like, this memorial to the truce was actually designed by a schoolboy after a nationwide competition. So again, you can see this is something important. This is not just a monument that some local government asked an artist to produce. No, they said, let's have a nationwide competition to get people involved, to get many people involved in thinking about the commemoration of the Christmas Truce. So here we are a long way from glorification of the war or glorification of the military. And this was the winner. It was designed by a schoolboy. It's built by professionals, I assume, but designed by a schoolboy, this idea of it's actually a football in iron and the shaking hands of a German and a British. Now, it was dedicated to December 2014 in the National Memorial Arboretum, so an official military place, by the Duke of Cambridge, accompanied by the manager of the English national football team. Now, the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, is second in line to the British throne and is an officer in the Royal Air Force. And so his official celebration of military insubordination might be seen as the most extreme case of the appropriation of anti-militarist symbols. So what did the prince, really the representative of the declining or almost disappeared British Empire, you can't get more imperious than a prince, what did he say? Well, the prince said, football had the power to bring people together and break down barriers. It is vital that 100 years on, we keep the Christmas Truce story alive. For future generations, this memorial will help to ensure that not just football, but also a nation remembers. So here you have a very extremely official member of the establishment insisting we must not forget these soldiers who risked being court-martialed to break the rules of the army. And it seems that commemoration sometimes brings into play an emotional economy and emotional rewards for the different people getting involved, which do not fit with any particularly rational message, because celebrating in a military place and by military people of a group of people breaking the British Army laws does seem to be remarkably, what's the word, contradictory. now there's a series of, I've mentioned a couple of events and songs, for example, and I will put on the web links to, on the blog, links to these, so you'll have to navigate forward and backward a little bit. But I have another one here because commercial interests also showed remarkable initiative in adopting the commemoration of the Christmas Truce. There is a tradition in Britain for a small number of very big companies to produce very long advertisements just before Christmas. These are short films of 3 or 4 minutes, so a very exceptional form of advertising. And the supermarket chain Sainsbury's produced its official Christmas advertising. This is this in 1914? Yes, in 1914. Sorry, in 2014. And it was a 4-minute sentimental film of the truce, with just at the very end the slogan, "Christmas is for sharing," Sainsbury's. And so this event, when soldiers from both sides broke the law and revolted for a short period against the order to kill each other, is now a commercial argument for going to Sainsbury's and not going to another supermarket. It's interesting how they put together this advert, which I will link to on the blog. How did they put together this advert? Well, they filmed it in cooperation with the Royal British Legion. Those are the people who sell the puppets. Very, very important. Sainsbury's wanted to be sure that by showing this advert based on the film of the Christmas Truce, they would not be accused of being unpatriotic, against the army, anti-militaristic, because of course, when you're a huge chain of supermarkets, does not want to upset many people. And so by doing it in collaboration with the Royal British Legion, a very celebrated charity to help soldiers, they made sure that this criticism was not going to happen. But at the same time, remember what this means. It means that they really believed that millions of people would think, oh, good, I'm glad we're remembering the Christmas Truce, and good old Sainsbury's for doing that. Yeah. So they were convinced that there was a fairly wide consensus about the fact that the Christmas Truce was a very positive event, because if you're advertising for supermarkets, you really want most of the population to like your supermarket, you're not going for a very specific minority. And so certainly you want to make adverts which are in some way consensual. Now, the advert was generally well received, showing the complexity of public reactions built on nostalgia, popular anti-militarism, and no other elements too. The advert did, however, come in for some criticisms. The journalist Ali Fogg in The Guardian on the 13th of November wrote, "In making the First World War beautiful to flog groceries, the filmmakers have disrespected the millions who suffered in the trenches." Whereas the No Glory for War, the No Glory in War campaign, awarded this advert its prize for the most cynical exploitation of World War I for commercial gain. I've gone through the different kinds of commemorative activity and events which define what commemoration is, and we've seen that it is complex politically, it is complex psychologically, it is complex emotionally. And so this is something which makes it very interesting. And memory studies is a whole field alongside history that perhaps with links to cultural history, which looks at how do people use the past to make the present by collective memory, by what everybody knows about the war and so on. And I just want to finish with some elements from towards the end of the centenary of 2018, a little selection of elements of commemoration. Oh, here we have Prince William then inaugurating the celebration of insubordination. And they have a couple of photographs from the Christmas advert. I think you do need to look at it. Now, unfortunately, this year I'm not able to do this in the way I usually do. Usually I show the advert and ask people to guess who made it. And there's a variety of answers, but sometimes people say, oh, it must have been made by some political party who hates wars. And as you will see, in fact, not at all. So in 2018, here's a couple of the things. Well, first of all, if you wanted a JCB, which is the most successful of the manufacturers of industrial equipment for building sites, here you have what we call a JCB. The company is so well known that we just say a JCB. When we want to talk about this kind of what's the word? This kind of machine, and as you can see, they've produced a special version which is covered with poppies to celebrate the centenary. And what they're going to do is auction it. They're going to auction it for a lot of money. They're going to sell it by auction for a lot of money, and all the money will go to the Royal British Legion. Yeah. So here we are, very much with the past and the present for commercial reasons. In France, we did have a musical comedy, Clémenceau le musical. I don't know, I wasn't able to go, unfortunately, and I don't know how successful it was. I've no doubt that it did receive public money, but as you can see, it was only on for 2 days. So we might consider that it was probably not a great commercial success. I shall try to find it on YouTube, but I'm not sure it is there. I'm going to come back to that. Yeah, so I'm going to go on to 2018 in Britain, and then and then I'll see how I get on with that. So in 2018, the poppy craze seemed to continue as ever, and you could buy, indeed, online a glass poppy bird bath or a poppy bird house, which can be interpreted as you wish, either as one additional reason or one additional encouragement not to forget the First World War, or as rather cynical commercial exploitation, or both, or neither. The Tower of London organised an enormous, spectacular light show for the centenary of the end of the war. And various public institutions wanted to be sure to get a look in, and here you can see a police car with poppies on it to mark the centenary. Again, you might think there's no immediate link, but obviously somebody thought that there was. Now, this is 2018, and we already spoke earlier about how emotional the campaign for wearing a poppy can be, and how people who did not want to wear a poppy could be accused of not being one of us, or even of being unpatriotic, and so on and so forth. And in this case, a Birmingham taxi driver who had a political objection to the British Army refused to transport the poppies. Apparently, it's in the Independent, so it's probably true. It's not like it's the Sun or something, and lost his job because he didn't want to transport these poppies, which he considered to be political symbols of something he didn't agree with, the British Empire. Now, France did not organize an enormous festival of commemoration 100 years after the First World War. There were a number of events, but there was not thousands of events like there were in Britain. Now, the main reason for this is actually the Second World War. Let me explain. In Britain, the defenders of British foreign policy are rather lucky in the sense that Britain was on the winning side in the First World War and also in the Second World War. And so when there are commemoration events, or even if they're about the First World War, everybody thinks about the two world wars together, and the patriots, not myself, but other people who are patriots, think, oh yes, two world wars which we won, both against Germany. That just shows Germany is a powerful country today, so we like to feel we are big. And of course, in France, the situation is much more complex from a memory point of view. The Second World War divided France terribly, with terrible sharpness, and this division did not completely disappear in 1945 by any means. And even today, you can get some controversy about that, and therefore a mass consensual commemoration of the First World War, which would necessarily make people think of the Second World War, is much more difficult. It's also the case that the First World War was more complex in France, because again, part of France was occupied, part of France was it was easier for there to be problems about who to cooperate with in France if the area was occupied. Very often French people would cooperate with the authorities, voluntarily or not. So it all becomes much more complex, and you cannot have a simplistic commemoration like you can in Britain. Nevertheless, we see that when they had a concert to commemorate the centenary, there were people to demand that the Chanson de Crown should not be sung at the 11th of November. Now, the Chanson de Crown is a soldier's song from the First World War, which denounces the war in very, very harsh terms. It is not typical. It's an exception, in fact. It's an exceptional song. It's often considered to be typical and to represent a huge tradition of anti-war feeling in the French army. This is not true, although it's true that in the French army in 1917 there were a large numbers of mutinies. The dozens of sections of the army all decided refused to fight, and the powers that be were extremely worried and frightened at the time. But nevertheless, the actual song is quite exceptional and not part of our whole tradition of songs. And so here you get a political debate. Can we sing songs about which support mutineers? With, of course, on the one hand, people saying, yes, this was a terrible war which needs denouncing, and the mutineers were right because they refused to fight. And on the other hand, people saying, well, no, in order to respect the French dead of the First World War, who were far more numerous than the English dead, than the British dead, in order to respect the dead, we must not introduce songs of dissent against the French foreign policy of the time. In Britain in 2018, then there were a certain number of activist meetings. Here we have an annual remembrance lecture. So this is interesting for remembrance, so for commemoration. And they've invited a Green Party member of Parliament to speak about active remembrance and waging peace together. Now, usually the word waging, we say waging war. We don't usually say waging peace. And so she's introducing this idea that if you want peace, it's not sufficient just not to go to war. You need to be fighting for peace. For example, campaigning against the arms trade, because Britain sells a huge number of arms to governments around the country who are not always lovers of peace and democracy, let's say. So there were activist events since 2018. Here we have the London Transport website. So this is the tube. If you want to go on the tube, if you want to go on the underground, then just like in France, you type in Transport for London and say, I want to leave from King's Cross and I want to arrive at Mornington Crescent. What's the best way to get there? And you can see that this official site of the London Transport has London Poppy Day with the adverts and saying, please give a lot of money to the military charities. So this is a consensual way of commemorating, give money to the military charities, rather than, which is quite a traditionalist idea, rather than thinking, for example, that the government should look after soldiers and that they shouldn't need charity. This is a photograph I took myself of a group of volunteers selling the poppies in the railway stations of London in early November. And indeed, they would do this in all the stations for a week or two. Sometimes they are sold by soldiers who are told by the army to go and sell them. So you get this interesting mix between charity and official military public relations. And here we have a poster then for the Royal British Legion Poppy Appeal. And notice their slogan there, supporting the armed forces community. So there are two things about this. First of all, it's very clear that to give money for a poppy is not to think only about the soldiers of the First World War, who have all died now. It is to be supporting soldiers from Iraq and British soldiers fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. But also you have something else here, supporting the armed forces community. So community in British politics is a very positive word, as you know. In French politics, it can be a very negative word, but in British politics, we talk about the Black community, the gay community, working class communities, urban communities, rural communities, and you have the armed forces community. So this is the idea of this poster, is to put forward then a positive view of the army. And here you have an article. This is all 2018. It's something I added recently. Here you have an article from the Daily Telegraph, and now the Daily Telegraph is the most conservative of the serious newspapers. And here they are noting in this article, white poppy sales soar. So the number of people buying white poppies is going up very quickly. Now, I wouldn't like to exaggerate. Certainly, if you're in London in November, you see 100 at least red poppies before you see a white poppy. But you do see several white poppies every time you go to a big railway station. This is new because 50 years ago it used to be, or 40 years ago I remember, it used to be really something extremely strange, to such an extent that people would say to those who wore white poppies, well, someone, your poppy is the wrong color, what's going on? Yeah, that people would not know that it existed. So now the white poppy campaign has much more public presence, even to such an extent that you get worried articles in the Telegraph. That's what some white poppies look like. Interestingly enough, then you have a white poppy among red poppies. And because this whole debate every November becomes very emotional, it is not so unusual to see people with a red poppy and a white poppy. So a white poppy because I hate war, and a red poppy because I'm patriotic. So you can feel the tension in there. I don't know if there's any space there for people to invent another poppy and say, oh well, let's have a blue poppy for, I don't know, remembering animals, or I don't know what. And we have another, so this is the origin of the white poppy, is with the Peace Pledge Union, which is a political organization established in the 1930s and is the British section of the War Resisters International. And to join the Peace Pledge Union, you have to sign, as its name suggests, a pledge: I reject war and will never support or sanction another. And this was a very 1930s, very radical Christian sort of approach and individual rejection of war. And it has had much more success recently. And what is interesting here, again, to show that the white poppy has made some progress, is although this is on the Peace Pledge Union website, this article says British Legion condemns online abuse of white poppy wearers. So what's happened is people are wearing white poppies, some people, and on some Facebook pages, there's been horrible insults at the people wearing white poppies, yeah? And because this has a certain public presence now, even the British Legion, the people who sell the red poppies, are saying, we do not agree with people being insulted for wearing white poppies, which is quite a political advance for the white poppy campaign. Now, of course, this is partly possible because of the social networks today. It's extremely easy to get insulted and threatened if you just need to go to the right Facebook forum, and you can be insulted and threatened tomorrow if you put a very different opinion on any one of 100. Yeah, so I must admit that sometimes when people say I have been insulted and threatened on Facebook, I'm not so impressed, because it's so easy to do on Facebook, and it doesn't necessarily have a very deep meaning. But that's a personal opinion. Here we have something that's from Australia, but which so takes us away from Britain a little bit more, but it's very much the past and the present, if you're interested in that par ailleurs. That is that Virgin Australia, so this of course is in 2018, because today in 2020 nobody seems to be flying anywhere. But Virgin Australia, the aviation company, announced a plan to honor veterans on every flight. And this article suggests that this plan is US style. And now I don't know if any of you have been to the United States, but if you go there, you can see that honoring ex-soldiers is a national sport. And when you're in the airport, you will hear it feels like every 3 minutes, it's probably every half an hour. There is free coffee available opposite door number 16 for soldiers or ex-soldiers. And this is a way for the airport authorities to show how patriotic they are. So it resembles in one way the poppy wearers. It's a very interesting tradition because, of course, it is not the case that soldiers have asked or ex-soldiers have said, oh, it's a pity we can't have free coffee. No, it's something which has no connection with coffee, which is all about the kind of values they want to put along. This goes even further into the United States because when I was last there and I went to a baseball match, and at one point they put the photograph of one or the film of one of the members of the crowd on the screen, and this was the veteran of the match. So today's ex-soldier who we're celebrating is this gentleman over here, who is dressed in his military uniform. So some real attempt to introduce the praise for the military into everyday life, which is a very American thing to do, and it's not a very British thing to do. But here you have Virgin Australia. I don't know what happened to this plan. I don't know if it worked. And it says here that the Virgin Australia has decided to do this. However, they have been criticised by people suggesting that they're just doing it to sell more plane tickets. I think I'm pretty much near the end here. But here you have in the Metro. Now the Metro is a free newspaper which distributes more than 1 million copies every day. And here on their website, you see and also in the newspaper, you see a page by the coordinator of the Peace Pledge Union. My white poppy doesn't mean I'm against remembrance. It means I am committed to peace. That is to say that this campaign, the White Poppy campaign, which used to be really a small thing for pacifists, now can get a page in a major newspaper which distributes more than 1 million copies a day. So there's been a certain amount of success there. So to finish here, and this is the last video for the seminar, commemoration is a complex social activity which can in no way be reduced to nostalgia or to populist nationalism. The commemorative activities in the United Kingdom in 2014 showed a remarkable capacity of people, organizations, and institutions to use the First World War in the past to express their present priorities, both explicitly and implicitly. Ambiguity was central. Activities which could be interpreted as either patriotic or respectful of the dead and anti-war, these activities were naturally able to drain huge audiences. Now, certainly there's a lot more of work that could be done on the meaning of nostalgia, the meaning of commemoration in Britain, and the link between the two. And it'd be interesting to see what happened in India, in Australia, in Canada. There are things written about this too, and I think there's a lot of research that could still be done on that. But that's where, with my normal conclusion, I think contradictory is the word you're looking for. I will stop there and thank you for attending this ceremony, and thank you for being cooperative in this very, very difficult sanitary situation, which meant that sometimes I couldn't see you and just put the video up, and even when we saw you, when I saw you with the masks, very difficult to judge people's reactions and so on. So let's just all hope that vaccine gets here soon, and do stay safe and follow the rules about keeping distant from people. Bye bye for now.